going to do something a bit different today with the sermons. We're following the church year. And for some of us who are Baptists, that's sort of a strange thing to even think about, whether that there is a church year. But we're following the seasons of the church year, seasons that are celebrated by congregations around the world. And this is Eastertide. And we are an Easter church. We are a church that knows that the source of our energy and the source of our mission all comes from the resurrected Christ, whose resurrection we celebrated a week ago. And so during this period of time, there's that emphasis that's going on. And if you pay attention to the music, I know sometimes I've spent more years than most of you sitting in Baptist pews, and I know that sometimes the music's going on and you sing, you look at it and you say that's nice, but you start to say, okay, when do we get to the sermon? And then after a while you're wishing, when do we get to the end? You know? But if you listen to the beautiful music that David chose for us to sing and sang himself, you see that there's a strong emphasis on the crucifixion of Christ, but also the resurrection. He lives. He's with us. As the flower blooms within us, and so we celebrate that today. But we're also today we're looking at our church, and instead of my preaching a long sermon, maybe we have asked two additional people to share about how University Baptist Church, what about University Baptist Church brings life, has brought life to them, and to some extent I will do that also. Decided that though we will stay in the Easter's tide, we would not use the scriptures that were suggested by the Revised Common Lectionary, which is, we do that so often. Helps us to narrow down what we want to preach on or emphasize. But today I asked Sarah to read two passages, two pericopes. I learned that word in seminary. I love it. Two pericopes, and about two passages of scripture from the book of Acts. The first 8 verses, and then the last 2 verses. That's a little bit strange. That's because I'm going to preach the whole book of Acts. But actually, when I think about Acts, I think about a time when I discovered that Acts was different than what I thought it was. The title that's given to the book of Acts is Acts of the Apostles. But I was looking back at an old commentary on Acts, and the author Frank Sachs said that was probably a title that was added along the way, because it really doesn't cover the Acts of the Apostles. It just basically talks about 2 or 3 apostles, mainly Peter and Paul, and a few of the others. But it doesn't tell us what happened to Thomas, or what happens to one of the other Judas, or what happened to any of these. A lot of the other people that we look at, when we look at the list, we see the people we see listed in the list of apostles. So it's not actually the Acts of the Apostles. And the commentary that I was looking at said, well, what is it then? It's the acts of the Holy Spirit, but it's not really. It's not just about the coming of the Spirit. The Spirit is there a lot of places, some places. It's not about the actions of the church. It's not the formation of the church. What is it? And his conclusion was that it's the story of how the gospel broke loose from this nationalistic, religious bag that it was in and spread throughout the world. It's the story of how the gospel broke through barriers and became more inclusive. It's the story. It's the story of the power of the gospel, the power of the realization that Christ is alive, and that Christ brings to us the strength to live and to serve God who loves us. So if you look through the book of Acts, you see one barrier after another that's crossed. One place in Acts, Philip is instructed to catch up with an Ethiopian eunuch who was certainly outside the circle. And in the sharing of the gospel, he became a brother and a part of the Christian community. We also see that the gospel breaking through, and there was a lot of debate over this, breaking through and going to the Gentiles, the non-Jews. And we see women being, the gospel breaking through and bringing women even into the center of things. We see in Acts, and we see the presence of enslaved people who now who become a part of this community with equal status with those that were not enslaved. We even see Roman soldiers Paul approaching Roman soldiers. And so at the very end of Acts, the gospel, the book says that the gospel, that Paul rented a place in Rome, and the gospel spread unhindered. And Frank Stagg says that's what the book of Acts is the gospel. The gospel was set free to go and to spread unhindered. We are the product of that, are we not? We come from many places in the world. Our background, our ancestry. If you look around this room, it's a very diverse group gathering. And we are here. We are here because somehow the gospel was brought to us, even though originally we would have been outside the circle. The second part of what my part, I was thinking about what to share to say. This is what University Baptist Church is to me, and this is how it touches me and brings me life. And sitting on my desk is an article that I wrote back in 2013 for Cornerstone. And those of you who were on the committee that helped us find Adam and bring Adam to become our pastor, and Adam probably saw this too. There was a list of things, of descriptions of words that I had written to describe University Baptist Church. And in my article, I said, this is the DNA of University Baptist Church. I know some of you have read this recently and heard it recently, but you might want to take notes. You will be tested on this. But I want to throw out some of these words that says something about who I think we are. And the awareness of this, the discovery of this, when I bump into this, it brings me life. It brings me joy, and it calls me to be a part of this community and to live out my faith in the world. Word one, University Baptist Church is inclusive. In our world, people tend to set up barriers, build fences, and separate out. In our world, people see it. There's an us and them. I was raised that way. I was raised in a community where, on a number of levels, us and them. And the religion, as far as religiously, there was that separation. We even looked at the Methodists as being them down the street, you know. And certainly the Catholics, you know. And so, but at University Baptist Church, we are an inclusive people. And as I said, if you looked around the room, and I'm glad that Mike gave you a chance to walk around the room and greet people, you will see that we are made up today. This congregation is made up today of people who are seniors and younger, you know, people of different ethnicity and of race, and there are just a lot of ways that we are different, but we are together and we are included, and we discover that we are alike in so many ways. Another point is that we believe we're radical about the power of the gospel. UBC historically has affirmed that God's love, proclaimed unequivocally through the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, is at the heart of who God is. This good news makes our hearts tender and open to others. It also is the North Star of our faith, gently leading us personally and communally through life. This power is evidenced in the regard that members show each other and visitors. We're also a brave church. This is a church that has historically has stood with the marginalized. I've heard stories, and since I came here, I'm still sort of a newbie in this group, but I've heard stories of how UBC was supportive of people, students of color, students from other countries, at a time when it was difficult for them to find housing. Some of you could tell the stories much better than I remember them. We're also a missional church. If you hang around this church long enough, you learn that the people of this church care for people beyond our walls, and they care for people after the final amen is said on Sundays. We share our resources. We go forth to the world to serve in the world. And many UBCers embody the slogan, each one a minister. As we leave on Sunday, we are aware that we go to serve. Serve in our families, serve with those with whom we live, serve in our places of employment, serve in our neighborhoods, and serve on the OSU campus and in our city. Fifth, we're a smart church. One of our former pastors said it's the smartest church he's ever pastored. Some of us right now, if we're students, we're looking for ways to affirm that we're smart. And this is a place where people work to reconcile their intellectual growth with their spiritual growth. Honest questions are respected. If I have doubts, I can explore them in the light of God's love and care, and the care of this community. We're a redemptive people. All people have things in their past that are regretful, painful, sad, and weak. UBC is a community of acceptance, a place where God heals the brokenhearted, soothes the scars, and turns lives around. God makes our mistakes into useful tools of service and understanding. Seventh thing is that we sort of speak with an American Baptist accent. That's our heritage, and we honor scriptures. We read scriptures. We value soul freedom, which means that every believer is able to discern a relationship with God that is right and true. And UBC respects the uniqueness of God working in the lives of individuals. But having said that, we're also a very ecumenical congregation. As I look around this group today, I know that we have come from a variety of denominations. We have come from a variety of religious backgrounds or non-backgrounds. And here we are. This is the place that we embrace and celebrate the differences that are brought together. There are a lot of rivers, a lot of streams, creeks, and such that flow into my spiritual river and make it and give it freshness. And those rivers impact me. So we're also very active. These are just some thoughts I've had. When I realize these things, then I find life. And I was thinking Friday night, this past week, my wife Helen and I attended, still Zoom by Zoom, a Paulist Associates meeting. Now, I won't go into all the details, but my wife and I are Paulist Associates, which means that we are part of the lay spirituality group of the Newman Center, which is across the sidewalk. Okay, and so and once a month we meet with a group, and this week the emphasis was on hope, and so we did some readings on hope, and then we broke into small groups, and when in our little group of 4 or 5 people, we realized that none of us were hopeful on Friday night. Have you been that way lately? Where hope seems to has been drained away. We live in a world where people are dying in war. We live in a world where there's injustice. There's just a lot of things that that create clouds over us. It makes it hard for us to hope. And as we shared that, something amazing happened. By sharing that together, we felt more hopeful. By confessing to one another that we did not have hope, we felt hopeful. And then we began to talk about, well, yeah, I feel hopeful. And the thing that makes me hopeful is that I do not walk alone, but I walk with people who are also looking for the glimmer of hope. And together, we bring our little shards, our little pieces of hope together. And we find, and with that, then we lift our heads, and we see each other, and we see the world, and we walk out into it with hope. And that gives me life. Our other 2 preachers today are Pat Rohrbaugh and Joe Jackson. So I invite Pat, I think you're first. Come on up.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. 20 years ago, when I was getting ready to move to Columbus, I printed out a list of American Baptist churches in Columbus area. And my intention was to start at the beginning of the list and visit each one. I thought that way I wouldn't get too involved in any one. And see, after I'd gone to all of those, which one I wanted to continue coming to. My best friend was just moving away from Columbus. And she said to me, I've heard good reports about University Baptist Church, and I think you should go there. So instead of starting with the A's, I'm not sure there are any, I think maybe B's, started towards the end of the list and came here. The first Sunday I was here, the Reverend Ethel Dunson made an announcement. She was a black preacher who couldn't get ordained in her own church. And someone told her, if you come to University Baptist Church, I think they'll ordain you. So anyway, Ethel gave an announcement and said that for the holiday banquet, student banquet, she needed help, that she was going to be peeling, I forget how many pounds of potatoes and different things, and they could use some help. So there was that announcement. There was a good sermon by a woman. I'm from a Baptist church where the deacons are men, and they serve communion, and the women wash the glasses. So I was impressed with that. After the sermon, a number of women talked to me about the International Neighborhood Coffee Hour that met on Wednesday. And they said, we need help, we need tutors. And all of those programs appealed to me. And so I came back again instead of going to another church on the list. I first went to Inch, which meets on Wednesday morning. And I don't know if I can give you a picture of exactly what Inch is like 20 years ago, but it met in Fellowship Hall. When the door was opened, you were hit by noise. Along one side, there were children with adults taking care of them. Then in the rest of Fellowship Hall, there were maybe 12 to 14 tables. Each table had a tutor, and there were maybe 5, 6 women from around the world. And at those tables, they worked with English. But that wasn't the only goal. They tried to welcome them to the community and tell them about Columbus. One of the written statements I saw was that we were not attempting to save anybody, that we were respecting their culture and welcoming them here. After Inch, sometimes I sit in the car and watch women leave because they were happy. I mean, they were enjoying the time that they had spent at the International Neighborhood Coffee Hour. The second thing that I became involved with was the student group. We had at that time both a full-time pastor and an assistant pastor for campus ministry. At that time it was a he. And on Wednesday afternoons, he would fix the meal. Students would come in and help him, or if they had a problem, they'd come early where they could talk to him alone and discuss things. But within a year of my coming, he received an invitation to be a full-time pastor someplace. So he left. And our pastor decided that until we got someone, she would fill in. And so she would cook the meal, and she would also lead the student group. Well, that pastor had 4 children, 2 small. She lived in Granville, and as a mother, it was obvious to me that was really difficult for her. So I volunteered to cook for Inch. And eventually, Allison Mowry, who wasn't a member then, right? You were still a member of Delaware, I think. Allison Mowry came as the assistant minister for students. She worked all day at the Ohio Reformatory for Women as a psychologist. She worked all day, she drove here, she met with this group, and sometimes I had a meeting Wednesday evening, and when I finished, they would still be meeting. So it was a valuable meeting to those students. We had a young man from Iceland. We had a man from some Asian country, Yan. We had a number of engineering students. But my personal favorite, who came infrequently, was a homeless man. And he would get his meal and he would sit at the table and he would look at me with adoration. And he would say, "Isn't she beautiful?" And I could see the students looking at each other like, this guy, he's nuts. But when you're 60, you know, it's kind of nice to hear things like that. Now, Allison doesn't remember any of this, but it did happen. One night in the kitchen, there maybe were 3 or 4 students, and I was in there, and our homeless man came, and he went through the "Isn't she beautiful" thing. And then he came around the island in the kitchen and planted a big wet kiss right on my head and started to hug me. And all of a sudden, David Siglerson stepped between us. David is a black belt in some martial thing. And I don't remember seeing the homeless man again. But good things happened at the student meeting besides my ego being puffed up. What I've discovered is that worship isn't passive. I have a t-shirt that says, "Vote. Democracy is not a spectator sport." And I think that's true of going to church and worshiping. And I think you tend to get out of things what you give.
It's not often I get to speak when I'm the youngest one. So I was told to tell me some things that made me excited about University Baptist Church and experiences. And I'll go recent and I'll go way back, because I've been here longer than those two. So last Sunday's service, last Easter service, was very exciting, as we hadn't been able to worship together Easter since 2019. The music was outstanding. The bell ringing was great. The sermon was excellent. And there were a lot of people here and a lot of families who came a long distance, and they all came up here and sang Hallelujah chorus. And I was asked 3 times to come up, and I shook my head no 3 times. That song's too hard for me, I guess. But that was a very exciting experience that just happened last week. Then I would go back quite some time in the early 80s when I started to come to church here and sat over there one fall Sunday, and June Law came to me and goes, "Young man, there's dinner after church." I happened to walk in first student potluck. I recognized the organist that I played with at David Furness at the Ohio State Fair Band. He would play chimes on the oboe when I was a senior, and so I instantly had a couple connections. So as a couple of years moved forward, all of a sudden there was political upheaval in Poland, and lo and behold, we had a refugee couple from Poland come here, and we housed them just across High Street at High in Norwich or Northwood, And I actually knew the owners of the building and got them a little bit of reduced rent and got them in there. And over a period of about 9 years, we sponsored maybe 10, 12 refugees, family of 4 with 2 young children, some single men, most from Poland, some from Slovakia. Then we had an African man, and I think somewhere in the 90s we had a Vietnamese family of 4. And so that was a very exciting time because members pulled together, how can we house these folks? Who has extra furniture? Who can take them to get signed up for their medical benefits? And Mary Riley was the angel and saint of all who did that because she knew the system. But we all pulled together and helped, and that was a very, very exciting time. And I awkwardly sent an email out to Ken, Adam, and Barbara about a month ago. I go, can we look into sponsoring a Ukrainian family? And I know we got a lot going on, but that would make me feel really excited again. I think we could figure out how to do it when the time comes. Thanks for listening and being here.